And we're live for this week's Crypto Bootcamp Hangout. Today we've got, well, so far joining us, we've got Brian and Jeffrey, both who have attended the Hangouts before. Brian, you actually posted up a link earlier that was pretty interesting. I was reading through a link called "Blockchain: How to Survive the Trough of Disillusionment," and it was kind of funny because some of the things that it talked about, it again went back to that point that I've hammered on before, where it feels like this is the 1997, in internet time to what blockchain is.
Right. And
specifically, there was a point in there where he said, overestimating the powers of the technology due to a combination of overweening headlines, over-enthusiastic salespeople, and blissful ignorance about the technical nuances. That was point 2 in the causes for disappointment. And I laughed my ass off because I'm constantly reminded of how, like, do you remember I think there was that movie, it was called like The Net or something like that, with like Sandra Bullock, and it was like, oh, they hacked your car and they deleted your identity and no one knows you exist anymore, and like, there was like all these things that supposedly a hacker had done through the internet, and everybody who like understood how the internet works was like, we can't even get a website to look the same in 2 browsers. We're not blowing up helicopters by hacking them. That's not how this works, And we've seen a lot of that. I mean, I've talked before about how it seems sometimes when I read big industry white papers, they're talking about, all these things that they expect blockchain is going to do for the industry, but it's purely theoretical. And when you get down into the meat of their white paper, it's like use case analysis, use case analysis, use case analysis. Their entire white paper is based on a bunch of guys sitting around going, well, what could we do with blockchain? I don't know. We could, provide enhanced security for our users. That sounds like a thing, but, they don't really have any idea how that actually works, and so point 2 like really stuck out. But the entirety of the article was really interesting because it wasn't what most of us are thinking about when it comes to, or at least most of us who tend to trade a bit on the market think about when it comes to the trough of disillusionment. Our trough of disillusionment is when the bear sets in, right? And all the values are in the toilet, and now we're questioning our decisions and all the rest of those things, which today was very good for me to see my portfolio climbing back up in value again. The Tron and Verge that I've doggedly hung on to are they're now up like 20%, and they're on the way up still. So I'm like, woo, But when it comes to the technology as a whole, we've certainly seen how from December till now, there's been some significant changes in the public perception of blockchain in total, and not just in regards to trade values, but sort of in news fatigue, right? People are like, oh God, you're talking about this crap again. They were more interested in it when it sounded like make a lot of money quickly. But, some of the companies and some of the people, I mean, I've seen some personal testimonials where people were like, oh yeah, we tried to do a blockchain thing and it was total shit and it was blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that wasn't the right technology for the use case of what you were going for. Maybe you were holding a hammer looking for nails,
Totally.
And so I really appreciated that article because it kind of dug into a lot of those things, and it talked about how as you move towards maturity in any technology, one of the things that happens is the scope of what that technology is suggested for begins narrowing significantly, right? You got 50 projects at the beginning, but at the end there's 5 left standing, and those are the actual viable projects that use the technology correctly, So what were your thoughts on that article? I mean, you specifically said you thought it was going to be a good topic to chew on.
Yeah, no, you hit a lot of the points that I was interested in as well. It pretty much talked about blockchain technology as one of many tools in a shed, and while it did give a lot of positivity to the fact that it's changed people's way of thinking and open businesses up to intersharing of information, it's not a solution for everything, like you were saying. It pretty much is is just a new tool in the shed, and people are going to it to try and find. I think the popularity. I think the get rich quick kind of. Everybody was like, oh well, you know, I can make a blockchain application and throw out an ICO and make $5 billion worth of money, you know, in people just signing up because why? Because they want to be there. But I think over the last, you know, I think we're just reiterating the same thing. But you know, the last 4 months almost of values going down, or should I say, retracing to a more acceptable level from yeah, right, something where they should be. It's disillusioned people from a place of, oh, I'm not going to be the next Bitcoin or the next Ethereum or, you know, one of those type of coins. And is this a solution that I really should use? Plus all of the different people who were just creating projects in blockchain to try and, you know, be the next hit wonder. I think that people's, you know, speaking back to the 1997 boom, there were tons of websites that are doing what Amazon's doing now, but people aren't ready for it, right? They're not prepared, and the ideas haven't quantified in their entirety to be that perfect solution where, like, you know, people want to stop going out, so they're going to order online, you know, from your website. Before, if you would have launched that in 97, the people would be like, well, what the hell? As a matter of fact, I read an article a little while back, I'm sure it was last year, but that there were like 4 different Amazons at the time that all failed before Amazon even got there. They just got there at the right time, you know, like people were uninterested. It was like, why would I buy books online? I could just go to Barnes and Nobles. It's like 5 minutes away, you know?
Well, and that's, you know, that's one of the things. I think there's a very direct correlation between the poorly thought out IPOs of the late 90s and early 2000s and the poorly thought out ICOs of the last year and a half, where you've got this real disconnect between perceived valuation to real valuation, right? I mean, I think one of the most famous of the .com busts was pets.com, right? You get this website that has this big ass idea, and they had hundreds of millions of dollars in funding before they ever earned a dollar. They had TV commercials with like the who was it? It was like Triumph the Wonder Dog or something driving a pet delivery truck, you know? Like, I remember seeing those commercials and I was like, really? You know? And you know, at the end of the day, it's, you know, the executives go out and buy Lamborghinis, and then nothing ever gets done in the technology, you know. And I think that's part of what we're seeing now is we're seeing, you know, some people who hopefully have learned from those previous failures and who are trying to pump the brakes a little bit and be like, hey, is this an actual appropriate valuation? When you look at some of these altcoins that have started up, we're talking in some cases a pre-alpha project, right? Like, you know, I mean, thank God at least some of the people that I work with are at least like, let's get to alpha or beta. Let's prove we can actually do this. But you had ICOs in 2017 where there was no effective code written to allow them to accomplish the things that they were talking about. And they're raising $100 million in an ICO. I mean, I am not surprised in the slightest that we've seen governments around the world clamping down on this kind of stuff, because they all hopefully remember it was less than 20 years ago when the market like lost 17% of its total value. The traditional market lost a significant amount of its total value because it was a valuation correction, and all these companies were bullshit. They had nothing to support the valuations that they had. You know, when you've got companies that, I mean, it's ridiculous in technology when we see companies being valued at like 20 to 30 times PIE. You've got when your actual earnings are zero, then you're talking about a valuation of infinity times PIE. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Well, and then you've got people who are, you know, I can't countless articles I've been reading recently. Students putting their college, you know, the college loan money up for things like that, and investing because they think, oh, well, listen, I got a little extra cash, I know where it should go, you know. And I really, am thankful for the articles that you read or you think that say, listen, don't invest any money that you're not willing to lose all of it. Gone. Bye. Later. Bye, Felicia. Like, it's, and if you win, great. Fantastic. But if you lose, you won't shoot yourself because you're like, I lost my entire life savings because I thought that I was going to be the next Bill Gates on some shit.
Or worse than that, debt leveraging against that. I remember somebody back in December saying they had borrowed $30,000 from their aunt to invest in Bitcoin, and I'm like, are you insane?
Yeah, totally. Well, and that just goes to show you that, you know, FUD and FOMO, you know, are king in this country right now. It's not even in the technology area, but you know, in our political lives and everything. We are knee-jerk reaction country, excuse me. All it takes is somebody to say, here's the newest thing, read a white paper that you can't 100% actualize, you know, or conceptualize, excuse me, and you're still signing up for it. You're like, Mr. Gullible. Do you know they took that out of the dictionary? Like on blockchain, gullible is no longer a word.
No, seriously, go look.
No, it's gone. It's completely. They eradicated it. You know, like it's shameful to feel that way. One of my favorite holidays is coming up next Sunday. Okay, it may not be a holiday to everybody else, but for me, it's a situation where April Fools, or you know, April 1st is the day for me to understand how many people in my life are ready to believe bullshit hand over fist. You know, and for me it's funny. Like, I don't ever do anything to try and like really hurt anyone or make anybody like lose money, but I've come up with some good ones this year. I'm working on the 2 week ahead April Fools. So, and I believe the rest of my family is going to hate me for it, but you believed me. You know what day it is.
And then, you know, I'm sincerely hoping that you know, as painful as it is, because of course, you know, the drawback of when sanity regains hold is that we stop having the sort of, you know, over the top returns, right? Like, woo, I got 5x, 10x, 15x, right? Well, you stop getting that as the market begins to stabilize. And, you know, then it's like, oh, I got 1.5x, I got 2x, I got 3x, and you're happy with that, right? You know, but you know, that is kind of the drawback. And what's funny is there's sort of a chain of events that occur, right? Like, one of the things that was really driving a ton of the valuation growth in Q4 last year was all the new money coming into the market.
Right.
And so as soon as those guys got spanked with a bear, they all pull their money back out, panic sell like crazy, right? And so then your overall market capitalization drops 15 to 20%. And it actually becomes like, I think a lot of people, and myself included, were like, you know, we were expecting our typical bounce back after January, and the bear just kind of kept dragging on and on. But it's because of that sort of forced feedback effect of not only do you no longer have new money coming in, but all the money, or a good amount of money that was in, has now been pulled out. And those people feel burnt. They're not putting money back in. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and that's understandable, but you know what? How can we actually? I mean, I didn't believe that it would continue forever. You know, in that up 500% over the last 2 months. You know, like that's.
I kind of wish it would, because that's fun.
This is very early. 10 years from now, it's going to be, you know, the Berkshire Hathaway size.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, but in that same respect, I mean, 10 years ago, or what was it? Yeah, well, yeah, almost 10 years ago now, the guys who were buying Bitcoin at, you know, $2, they're happy enough that it's up to 10 grand, and they're like, fuck it, I don't care.
Did you see the Storm token last night?
I did. It went, what did it go up, like 250%?
1,000%.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, I was watching it. I was like, holy cow. It was like right around 200 or 220. Well, anyway, that's what
was the deal with that?
I mean, Binance, they said it went up like 1,000%, but it was at 200 something, and then it just shot up to like 900, and then it stayed there. And I was like, holy cow. And then, of course, I bought some, and then it started tanking. So,
He bought the dip. He bought the dip.
I'm out of it now. It's going to go back down. But
I mean, it's, we've been sitting here for the last couple of months, right? And I've been saying for a while, I'm like, listen, it's awesome when you get these like multipliers, but the vast majority of these huge multipliers is just whales playing in the space, right? We know that. If you're able to ride that up, and if you're able to eke some profit off of that, awesome, right? But the thing is, like, I've been holding Tron and Verge, and I watched it get all the way down into the 3s, and then it's in the 4s, and right now it's in the 5s, right? And it's actually showing real growth, real slow, projected, reliable growth, Right. And as each of these new floors gets established, right, like Tron's sitting at 580 right now, right? It's moving back up in that direction. And we know, of course, that there's in the next 7 days, Tron's expected to hit some milestones. So we're going to start seeing some more speculation and seeing that drive growth and all the rest of that. But I'm not expecting it to go to 15 again overnight or to 21 again overnight, right? What I am hoping is that Tron as an organization continues to build on their technology. And because of that, the value of the token continues to grow. And that's something that I've argued about over and over and over again, like the difference between traders and investors, right? Guys like Mark are super sharp about how can I eke some value out of, the movement of the masses and sort of watch and predict how people are going to speculate and FOMO and FUD. But, at the end of the day, I expect Tron to go up a lot more than where it's at now because I expect the technology to mature and the value of that technology increases as it matures.
Totally. And I think that there are some actual projects out there like Tron, like, Bitcoin obviously is still there, but like Ethereum and things like that, like Neo, that I think
Neo's been doing great. Can't complain.
That I think that when we talk about a typical market, like the stock market, I feel that those coins are in a position, or hopefully continue on into a position, to have actualized real growth, right? And that their technology won't just fade away. But with there being 1,500 coins, the entirety of the crypto market space is not going to see forever. They're not going to continue to see those 2,000% gains. We will see projects grow, and it will take time for them to grow, and I'm okay with that. I think that there are projects that we're going to
investing versus trading.
Right, exactly, and on that too, I think that there is some trading ideology that I'm learning, that I'm reading from that book that Mark put me up on, that it's valid, right? That even though I do believe in Neo, or I believe in Ethereum, I sold my shit at $850. I'm glad I did, because now I bought some more at $475 the other day, and I'm like, yeah, I doubled down, and I'm going back to a better position. Would I have been okay holding? Yeah, because originally I bought it, when it was $200. So I made some money, but I'm still, because of trading, because of truly believing in the project, and also playing against the fears and the FUD and the FOMO, I'm even more like Brian Cribbs. I'm happy with getting a 10% per day gain. Like, that's fantastic.
2.5%. I mean, that's one of the things that differed when I was talking to him about my approach with swing trading versus his approach with the bots and making fast trades. When I'm swing trading, I'm looking for 100%, 200%. I'm looking for those 2x, 3x, 5x deals, right? Minimally, I'm looking for 25 to 50%.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
like he's like, most of my trades, I'm trading at like 2.5%, 3% gain. I just do it a lot all day, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Those with him with his bots, and everyone else with their damn bots, they're in that, And when I remember when I was first getting into the stock market, the gentleman who was hooking me up was like, "Hey, listen, if you get 10% for the year, you've done great. You came up 10% of your investment for the year." And when I got into crypto and I went up, 400% in a month, I was like, wow. Like I did 10
stock
years.
traders are suckers, man. They ought to be in on this.
Yeah, totally. And then I told him, and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. You guys should jump in. I'm like, I'm going to buy a Lambo in a couple months. And you're like, I'll come pick you up. But to the like, I truly believe in the technology. I think that the projects, like you said, Chris, the projects you believe in, invest in and stick with them. And yet at the same time, if you can make a little extra money on them on the way and be in a better position so that you can, get 2 Lambos by the time they actually take off, then fuck it, why not?
No question about it. Jeff, any thoughts on that?
No. I mean, I'm just listening. I don't really have any questions.
One of the other articles, actually, you posted 2 other articles about this, Brian, and I thought that it really needed to be talked about. You were talking about the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations, right?
Yeah, EU.
And
right.
one of the things in the EU that potentially is in huge conflict with some of the fundamental natures of blockchain is what's called the right of erasure, right? So Google ran into this in the past that, somebody who was, maybe they were falsely accused of some shitty crime, like, pedophilia or something, right? And so then a bunch of articles go out about, the MP of something has been accused of pedophilia. Well, then it comes out later at trial that it was all a bullshit accusation and everything else, right? But then every time someone Googles that MP's name, right, you get all these articles back about they're a pedophile, right? And so the EU takes the right of erasure pretty seriously. The ability for you as an individual to say this data about me is false or inflammatory, and I demand that it be taken away, deleted, disappeared, right?
Right.
And with blockchain, given that the data in the blockchain is immutable as a fundamental part of that, then that really means that there's an entire class of applications which are going to be always in conflict with the GDPR, right? So, for example, people talking about building social media on top of blockchain applications, that's fundamentally not going to happen.
No,
Or if it does, you're looking at millions to billions in euros in fines.
Right.
That was really eye-opening because I read through that and they were talking about all the places where it comes into conflict. So, for instance, you've got immutability, right? The right to erasure and data minimization, the amount of information that's required and that's stored on there, and some of the stuff is like it's really, really broadly based. Like the vast majority of Google applications could not run on blockchain in the EU at all because they contain some of the data that's listed, data like IP address, license plate, your locations at certain dates and times, That
could be reversed. Like it's kind of crazy to the point of like, even if you think that some things be like, oh yeah, it's a hash, be like, well, if they can logically prove that they could reverse engineer a hash back to the information, then it falls under that same idea that it's not available, not possible.
Yeah, and a hash isn't even a good defense anyways, because a hash just means that there's limited access to the data. But when the law itself states that the data has to be expunged, how can you do that?
Right.
We've already seen how it's, people are like, eventually the CIA is going to be able to trace you back through the blockchain. Eventually? Are you kidding me? Chain analysis is a commercially available tool open to anyone willing to pay for access that lets you look at any blockchain and pull data out of it about any individual user in that blockchain. People fundamentally need to understand that, right? Blockchain, unless it's an explicitly private blockchain like Monero, but blockchain by default is an open ledger.
Right.
And so that means there are like whole classes of applications where blockchain is just never going to be a good technology because it's going to run afoul of the laws around personal privacy.
Right. Totally. Well, and what I wonder is how, just reading that article, I was like, well, the internet in and of itself kind of, goes through that. It'd be like anything you put on the internet is there forever. Like, it may not be on one website, but like, I deleted some Twitter, some tweets. Like, there's websites committed to just downloading Twitters and be like, historical tweets. Be like, yeah, he deleted it, but it's on 5 other websites of where he wrote it down.
Well, it's funny because it used to be. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was gonna say, what was that old website? I think it was with Yahoo. It was like GeoPages or something like that. They downloaded the entire thing, and it's in Canada somewhere.
Yep. The entire GeoCities subdomain.
Oh, GeoCities, that's it.
Well, and that's the other thing is that we used to think about these things as sort of having a built-in defense because of the scale of the data.
Right.
But what we're seeing now, I mean, hell, blockchain is a good example of that. If you want to mine Bitcoin right now, what's your initial download?
Like, isn't it like 2 gigs or something like that?
No, hell no. It's like 22 terabytes.
Oh, wow.
Shit. If you're downloading the entire blockchain from scratch right now,
wow.
I mean, that's probably an exaggeration. My numbers are way off there, but it's way the hell more than 2 gigs. And that was, part of the problem that they were having with blockchain transactions was the amount of transaction time because of the size of the write of each of those things, Well, I may be talking out of my ass, so I'm going to Google right now. What?
Yeah, I was about to say, I was going to Google
file size.
Well, even into that same discussion, like we were talking about pedophilia in the blockchain, the links they're having problems just with that now. But like, how do you go back and erase something that's unerasable?
Yes, exactly.
And that's just in shit that we would all gladly, have a fork to delete all of those kind of comments. But what? No.
Oh, actually, your number was much better than mine was, as it turns out.
Okay.
But long story short, right? We're talking about every time the blockchain is synced up. Well, no, see, I'm seeing now. In 2014, it was over 20 gig in size. So why is this say? And then this one in 2016 says it reached 100 gigs. So I don't understand. Oh, it's the size of the transaction. Each transaction right now is 2 gig.
Okay.
The total blockchain size is huge. Yeah, so Ethereum right now is sitting at over 200 gigabytes.
Wow.
I mean, that's what you're looking at in total file size. And people are doing that, right? They're downloading all of that on a regular basis. I mean, our bandwidth still sucks here in the U.S. as far as broadband size. But if you're motivated, I mean, I think the last time I synced up to the total Dogecoin network, it took me like 5 days to get totally synced to it,
Right.
But it's, it doesn't really matter so much because with patience and a decent broadband connection, you are going to get that whole thing. You know what I mean? And so the size of the data is no longer inherently a protection in itself.
Right. Plus, with server farms and people having the ability to, have off-site data, it's not like you have to, have a hard drive that's that size or multiples. You could really just rent the space and have complete access to it on a virtual server or something of that nature.
And Jeffrey knows a little bit about
that. What was that last part?
Renting server farms. I mean, I remember when, with torrenting, right? the idea that you don't download all this shit to your local box, you download it to some VPNs or some VPS somewhere as a seed box. You do all your torrent, all your seeding from that seed box, and then you just FTP in and grab the file specifically that you want if you're looking to watch a movie or something, you know?
That's a good point. I think I might have to make some adjustments. So I usually just use my NAS and download it to that. But and I've been lucky. I've only had like maybe 2 or 3 cease and desists.
I've had a few over the years.
I've had none, but I'll tell you that one of the things that I do to have none is that I use my own Eris surfboard router. I don't use the ISP's router. So I'm not using any of their software, and basically I just I clone the Mac from my tower to the actual surfboard box. So that's how it distributes through the network when it connects to my Wi-Fi router. And if you're not using the ISP's cable modem, then their ability to, you know, run easy to use, easy to monitor software is much limited.
Yep. Yeah. I think they stopped caring so much too. I notice unless it's music, if you're downloading MP3s, you might get an email like almost immediately, depending on what it is.
Oh wow!
But, yeah, I remember that happening like 1 or 2 years ago, and I had an email from Verizon.
They're like, "Hey, by the way, yeah, could you not?"
They'll punish you too. They'll slow your bandwidth. Go ahead. Sorry.
I read a couple articles in what, you know, some really smart MIT dudes using MAC address cloning and things like that kind of disproved the ability for them to go after you in court for that. Be like, listen, I can make the printer in the computer lab look like it's torrenting shit all day long. Like, all I got to do is put a MAC address of this over there, and now what? Like, how can you prove that an IP address is a human behind it? Like, it could be being spoofed from somebody else to use that IP address and MAC address and all of those different things. So I'm not sure that they didn't have a little bit more difficulty in proving, especially when people started taping up their cameras.
Well, you know that like ASCAP itself, right? Their first 12 or 15 court cases were just like slam dunks.
Right.
But then they started losing. And it was because of issues like these. And so now they had to weigh that sort of, what's the sunk cost, right? Is it worth me going through? Because some of these cases were just ridiculous. They're like asking for judgments of like amounts that are greater than what the entire industry earns in a year. And they're saying that me downloading the latest Taylor Swift fucking CD is causing that much damage to the industry, you know?
Yeah. Totally.
And they were totally like, oh, you know, every MP3 that you download is the potential to do like up to $45,000 in damage or something. Like, it was just some ridiculous number, you know? And so the laws themselves have to catch up to the technology at some point so that you have like reasonable punitive damages for what's actually occurring. You know, I mean, like, one of the things that I've talked about many times in web development is, you know, there's a tendency among web developers, if you get stiffed by a client, but you've got access to their shit, you're like, well, I'm just going to break their shit. Well, the problem with that is under the 2001 Computer Security Act, any unauthorized alteration to a computer system is treated as a third-class felony. Basically, it was one of the first rules they put in place to try and slow down hacking, right? But that rule is so poorly stated and so lacking in the nuance of technology that if you're a web guy and you shut down somebody's website, well, not only do you have criminal damages because that was unauthorized alterations to the computer system, you also now have potentially financial damages as well because you hurt the business's ability to make money, right? So it's a wildly off-topic tangent, all things considered, but it's just, you know, it's reflective of how those laws are. But by the way, if you're a web guy out there watching this, don't shut off their shit. Just like take them to small claims court and sue them.
Yeah, that's a funny thing because I definitely remember some buddies being like, "Oh, well, fuck this dude. You don't want to pay me? Shut
Did you read about the FBI, how they were looking for hackers, but
Always?
they can't hire any because they all smoke pot?
That's
That's
funny.
true.
That's kind of like the same thing, but
And it's one of those things where, you know, again, the laws themselves have to catch up to the technology, and law moves so slowly that it's almost always going to be behind, you know. So
Surely.
I think maybe the framework of the laws themselves have to catch up. And that sort of brings me to maybe a final topic to chew on. I've got a friend locally who's currently in law school, and she approached me to act as an advisor on her thesis. And her thesis was in how blockchain can be used to improve governance in general. One of the things was we can easily solve voting discrepancies and issues if every voter has an address similar to a wallet address, right? And that's issued as part of their voter registration. And then, you know, when it comes time for an election, you make a transaction against that address that shows who your vote's for, and there's a one-to-one connection across the nation, you know, and a hard immutable record, right? A blockchain record of votes cast by people, right?
Right.
But like that's just one of many possible applications of blockchain and governance. I mean, I think there's some obvious things that we can look at, like in the CMS and healthcare space, you know, with tracking expenditures and tracking who it goes to and all the rest of those things. But if we looked at like laws themselves, right? If our actual federal legislation and state level legislation was recorded in blockchain form, and then allowing for consensus voting, you know, allowing for a senator to be like, okay, in my district in Florida, how many of my voters support this law in place as it sits, right? You know, I think there's some really interesting ideas that can be explored there that we haven't even started getting into yet. Have y'all put any thought into blockchain on governance?
Well, I think there's a lot of beautiful, like you said, situations where that might happen. I think that our governance would have to come a long way. That would clear out, when a senator or a mayor or a governor decides to vote on a law because he's being, funded by, for instance, our current state of, in Florida with the assault rifle ban, right? And he's getting money from the NRA, and he's being backed by people who say, listen, leave the law alone. And our senators and our local politicians are being backed by those same people, and yet the people are put in votes. Like, I think that it would create almost another civil war in which we actualize that people's votes aren't being honored, right? Like, and what the people really want isn't really coming across. Because unfortunately, I think that it would be a really interesting thing whereby maybe like, accountability comes into place in that same thing. Like, for instance, so if you're the, governor of the state of Florida and you vote less than 50% of the time the way that your constituents would like you to raise, the next time that we have a election, you can't even run up for election. Why? Because we put you in place, you were told you were going to vote a certain way, and the blockchain votes said to vote no, and you voted yes more than 50% of the time. So you didn't do what we asked you, so you can no longer be in that position. I don't think that they would get on board with that. Like that brings a lot of clarity to a situation where
they from a lack of clarity.
Yeah, that gray area is how we all kind of continue to move on, and we can all think that the people we put in place are voting the way we want them to, but as soon as you actualize what people really want and then give some sort of accountability, good Lord. I mean, I think that we're more likely to, like we're doing now with the blockchain, like Walmart's doing with the food industry, where you can track the produce and food from maker to shelf and make it so that it doesn't take 3 weeks to figure out where this cabbage that's got salmonella came from. You can trace it back to the exact product date lot that came out within 2 minutes. You know where it came from. So I think those are much more likely to happen sooner than later. I think that we're still in a, on the governance side, I think that they're very cautious in accountability, and like you said, the ledger technology would be one where think about just the last, maybe not during Obama's or his voting areas, but the Bush Gore hanging Chad thing, be well, we know exactly how people wanted to vote. Be like, so, or even in number 45, where it's like, all right, see, I won. Be like, if we got rid of the electoral college because we can count votes faster than they can do numbers.
Well, and understanding that the electoral college itself was only came about because the average person during the time of the foundation of the electoral college didn't have access to national level news. And so they were wildly able to be affected by localized bad data.
Right.
Now, we theoretically have access to global data now, but the problem is we all get it through platforms where artificial algorithms shape exactly which of that data we're able to see.
Yeah.
It's also for a check and balance too, as each one of those electoral points is a person, and they don't have to vote for the majority. They can change their vote after the election when they turn in their electoral vote. It just so happens a lot of them didn't do their job, in the last.
Well, I mean, what we've seen is that electoral votes have gone overwhelmingly in line with popular votes throughout most of history, and I think a lot of people would argue that that's a system working as expected.
Yeah, but I remember reading about it when they actually decided to do electoral votes. It was like one of the main things. It was another protection to protect us from like a demagogue or someone who is unfit but just popular. You know what I mean? So it's like
no examples come to mind.
Yeah,
none recent at least.
Nothing recent. I think there was one where it was close.
Right. Well, and in that it seems, well, especially with this recent election and what's come out about Facebook user data and the whole way that, even though we have the ability to get data on a national level instantaneously, doesn't stop us from falling victim to bad data, for lack of a better word, fake news. And although it's funny and it's not, I mean, our user profile, we were played exactly to the point where some people didn't even go vote because they were like, oh, well, fuck it, I don't want to vote for either. Well, you know what? You got played to do that. Your user profile.
I mean, it's the system worked exactly as expected, right? Because the expectation is, and I've been watching analysis on Facebook, and people laugh constantly because I'm one of those contradictory sort of people, right? I work for a marketing firm, but I hate the vast majority of marketing. I am a loud and engaged Facebook user, and I despise Facebook, it all sort of falls under the necessary evil thing, right? But I've been reading analysis for the last, 6, 7, 8 years, ever since EdgeRank and some of these early algorithms were introduced on Facebook, where they were talking about the siloing of personal data and how once it's established what your preferences are, right, it's easy for an algorithm to be like, okay, this person hates Hillary and likes Trump. So if I get a bad article about Hillary, show it to them. If I get a good article about Trump, show it to them. and they're going to engage with that more, right? And so looking at it from an executive perspective, and obviously I've never been an executive in an organization on the scale of Facebook, but I've been an executive for long enough that I'm familiar with evaluating strategies around P&Ls. You know, if it's early 2016 and I'm seeing a significant jump in P&L, one of the first things that I do is analyze why, because I want to capitalize on that, right? If my profits are going up, I want to make sure whatever's driving that profit to go up to happen more, right? So it's pretty feasible, I think, that executives at Facebook early in this entire process were very, very intimately familiar with where these new profits were coming from as companies started dumping more and more money in to kind of create these influence factors. And I am quite confident that their response was to roll out a new set of advertiser tools, which made it even easier to target specifically certain types of subgroups and behaviors, you know? And so when we've got, you know, we have a really interesting abrogation of the First Amendment that I don't think the founding fathers ever really took into consideration, which is, how is free speech protected when the platforms of free speech are privately owned? Because the First Amendment concepts were all based around the idea of sort of the town square, right? You can go to the town square and you know, hold up a big sign and put your message out there, and the government can't take that away. You can go print whatever you want, right? And you can go post that up in public places, and the government's not allowed to like make laws saying that you can't do that. But
well, actually they can, if they, you know, it's in the Constitution that Congress can do whatever it wants. It's actually pretty tyrannical by using the General Welfare Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause, and the Commerce Clause.
Yeah, so, but you know what I mean? For all those exceptions, for the last 400 years, SCOTUS has overwhelmingly supported even extreme interpretations of free speech.
Yep.
They do hold those amendments pretty freaking strong. And congressional laws that have challenged the core meaning of those amendments get struck down pretty quickly. I mean,
but what happens when it's a global corporation, you know, that owns, I mean, how far?
And that's exactly the point. The question isn't about legality here, because what's happening is entirely legal. And in fact, what's happening is entirely constitutional. There's no constitutional barrier to a major corporation providing the most popular speech platform out there and then using their powers as the owners of that speech platform to shape what that speech looks like. There's nothing unconstitutional about that.
Yeah. Well, look at the East India Company. It all depends on how bad it gets, you know, and then it all the will of the people. I mean, it just, look how divided the country is, you know. I mean, it's obviously swinging back to the left a little bit, well, maybe a lot. There's the demographics I haven't seen changed in like this in 150 years in some places, you know. Pennsylvania was like 20% loss for the right, you know, which is insane. But as the, you know, when things get so bad, there's like a turning point. You know, a lot of these cases the Supreme Court doesn't even look at. You know, they let it get decided by the lower courts unless it's bad. So I guess it all just depends.
It's one of the first things that has to be proved is that there has been standing, right? You have to be able to assert that you are actually losing a civil right in some way. I mean, the process to get there is pretty strong. And so, yeah, you're right. Not all cases get heard by SCOTUS, and that's not always the last defense. It is when those things get tested. But at the end of the day, right, when we look at how technology can help shape the future for our government, and when we look at how blockchain itself, because of its immutable nature, can be the kind of technology that can make significant differences when it comes to locking down enforcement and accountability for our representatives. But then we see that the biggest obstacle that still remains is how this message gets communicated. And as long as these massive means of communication are held in private hands, it means that we can't really effectively coordinate as the 300 million person voting bloc of this country, you know?
Right. and or when we get played because of our being on that soapbox, and well, it goes back to how we started. Well, maybe not started. The second or third thing we were talking about, our ability to delete our data, and our data, us owning our own data, and, and having to be asked how we see, is it okay? I mean, there's so many things that require permissions. Now on Android phones, they've changed it up where everything you have to approve every permission you give, even after downloading the app, right? You have to individually approve, access to the hard drive, access to your camera, access to everything.
At the time of action, typically too, that's a big change. That it used to be you'd install an app and it would just be like, here's a list of things. Do you approve that? Now it's like you can install the app, and then every time the app wants to do something, you have to approve that permission the first time it does.
Which clearly makes you understand and be like, oh, I hit that button to do this, and this is why they need it, right? So that's a beautiful thing. Yet, with our own data and our own online presence, that's gone.
They need to present more like what they do with that information. A lot of people didn't understand back in the day when everybody started getting concerned about their privacy rights, and that the app needs to work. So it needs permission to access your hard drive and to do whatever it wants you to do. So, I guess as time progresses on, we'll get, solutions to all that kind of stuff. As you can see, you have to grant it access now.
Right. Yeah, I think it's just like that. We're gonna get burned. Unfortunately, we don't have the foresight. We have to get burned, or have like what happened recently in the Facebook situation. Somebody has a class action lawsuit, and they decide, listen, I don't think that it's fair that you use my data in that way. I need to be, asked before that. So then laws change, like this, like the European Union's ability for, like, I want to delete my data. Google now has this thing where you can take out all your data and have it deleted. You are in control of your own information. Granted, while you're using their services, you're still under that same guise of, hey, you're using our services, we can do what we want. But it's going towards that. I do believe, but unfortunately, it's going to take us having to learn in hindsight what we want changed.
Yeah, I agree completely. And then the saddest part of all of that is that it takes a fair amount of money. And as soon as we start trying to make deals to finance this sort of development, you start having to, you're faced with those same moral decisions once again. Whose purse strings are going to control the project,
Right. Sorry.
So, once again, we've ended up having a remarkably political conversation about the technology, and I think I almost want to add that into the description of the weekly boot camp, because I think the social and political ramifications of blockchain technology are worth exploring, and obviously, I'm not trying to advocate for any particular political position or stance or anything along that line in these conversations, but I definitely think that there are conversations that need to happen.
Yeah, they're all important. I mean, they could ban crypto tomorrow, Who knows?
And I think crypto, it's in the heart of crypto. I think we all, and I mean, maybe I'm speaking for only myself, but I'd like to think that we all jumped in because we think of it as a disruptive technology that takes the power out of the central bank or the central service of the people who have all of our information, and gives it back to the user, and gives it back to a place where, like Tron, I fight for the user, man.
There you go.
And I think you've really gotten to the heart of this, right? The understanding that a few large companies in the world have the vast majority of the data in giant private pockets. Pushing forward a model that decentralizes that data structure and disintermediates the control of that data. I think especially for a lot of us old technology dogs, there's a lot of value to that. We can see how, you might start looking to use an organization that is open and honest about how it collects data and where it uses your data and all those things, and not open and honest in a quarterly report from the shareholders way, but open and honest in a you can check it yourself because it's stored as part of a blockchain way, you know?
Right. I agree.
And it's 5:15. I mean, I think that's a perfect episode right there. That's probably the place to call it. We'll be back next Saturday at 4 p.m. EST. So anyone who wants to participate, and I'll be sharing this group out shortly. And if you sat through all of our conversation, then thanks for watching.